They called it an intervention, but it was an ambush to disown the daughter they thought was just a drifting vlogger. My family sat waiting, convinced the black sheep would finally bow her head and sign. They did not know that while they treated me like a liability to be cut, I secretly owned nearly 50% of their debt. If you have ever been labeled a failure while building a secret empire, pull up a chair. My name is Allison Vega. I am 32 years old, standing on the precipice of a manufactured catastrophe, holding a leather-bound book that should have burned a decade ago. The ink on the page is faded, written by a hand that shook with teenage rage and impotence, but the words remain as sharp as broken glass. I read the entry from when I was 15 years old. It says that feeling like a stranger in your own house is not just loneliness, it is a haunting. It says that in this house, silence is not peace. Silence is a hand over your mouth. I snapped the book shut and shoved it into my oversized tote bag. The autumn wind bit through my coat, carrying the scent of dry leaves and expensive landscaping. Before me stood Ellington Ridge Estate. It was not just a home, it was a monument to the ego of the people inside. The front facade was a towering expanse of glass and steel, designed to let the world look in and envy us. But tonight, the curtains were drawn tight. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the manicured lawn. The entire estate looked less like a residence and more like a mausoleum for the living. In my hand, I held the heavy cream card stock they had sent via courier. It was embossed with the family crest, a ridiculous thing involving a lion and a shield that my father had commissioned 20 years ago to buy a history we did not have. The text was printed in elegant calligraphy. It read, Family Intervention and Stewardship Meeting, Wednesday, November 4th, 6 o'clock in the evening, attendance mandatory. They called it an intervention. I knew better. This was a sentencing hearing. I looked at my reflection in the darkened glass of the front door. I did not look like an Ellington. I wore a thrifted trench coat over comfortable linen trousers and worn boots. My hair was tied back in a messy bun. The uniform of the travel vlogger and podcaster I had become, to the world, to my hundreds of thousands of followers. I was Allison, the voice of the burnt-out generation, the woman who traveled to remote cabins and spoke about healing from toxic productivity. To the people waiting inside this house, I was a failure. I was the driftwood that refused to catch fire. They saw a woman who refused to carry the weight of the family name. They had no idea that while they were busy polishing the brass on the Titanic, I had been building the iceberg. I took a breath, tasting the cold air. I knew exactly who was waiting for me in the main drawing room. First, there would be Graham Ellington, my father, the Titan, the man who built Ellington Estates from a single golf course into a nationwide empire of luxury country clubs and private resorts. He did not see people. He saw assets and liabilities. For the last 10 years, I had been a non-performing asset. He would be sitting in his wingback chair, nursing a glass of scotch that cost more than my first car, looking at me with that mixture of disappointment and calculation that I knew so well. Next to him would be Vivian, my mother in title, though not in blood. She was the curator of the Ellington myth. Vivian did not have emotions. She had public relations strategies. If she cried tonight, it would be a single, photogenic tear designed to induce guilt without ruining her mascara. She was obsessed with reputation, terrified that my wandering lifestyle would somehow smudge the pristine lens through which she demanded society view us. Then there were the golden children. Lena, my older sister, the director of brand image. She was 35 years old and had never had a hair out of place in her life. She looked at me like I was a stain on a silk blouse, and Miles, my brother, the chief financial officer, Miles, who thought he was a shark but was really just a remora attached to our father's side. He would be holding the ledger, the one with the red ink he blamed on the economy, on the market, on anything but his own incompetence. They would all be there, and they would have brought Mr. Calloway, the family lawyer, to make the execution legal. I could picture the room before I even entered. They would have arranged the seating in a semicircle, a united front of judgment, facing them, isolated in the center of the Persian rug, would be a single wooden chair. The chair for the accused, the chair for the problem child. It was a setup designed to make me feel small, to make me feel like the 15-year-old girl who wrote in that diary, begging to be seen. They wanted to interrogate me. They wanted to strip me of the family trust, cut up my credit cards, and cast me out into the cold to teach me a lesson about the real world. It was almost funny. I remembered the last time I truly lived here. I was 22 years old. I had just told Graham that I did not want a position in the marketing department of Ellington Estates. I wanted to write. I wanted to see the world. We were standing in his study, surrounded by leather books he never read. Graham had looked at me, not with anger, but with a cold dismissal that hurt worse than a slap. He had said that I did not have the grit for business. He said, and I remembered every syllable, that I did not fit this legacy. You are soft. Allison, you are a dreamer. Dreamers are expensive to keep. That sentence had been intended as an eviction notice. He thought he was cutting me off from the source of my power. He did not realize he was pushing me out of the nest so I could learn to hunt. I left that night with 2 suitcases and a heart full of broken glass. I spent the next decade proving him right, or so he thought. I traveled, I blogged, I made podcasts about mental health and the crushing weight of expectations. I let them believe I was just scraping by, living off the allowance from the trust fund and my meager ad revenue. They saw the vlog posts about meditation retreats in Bali and co-living spaces in Lisbon. They sneered at my videos about finding peace in simplicity. They missed the irony. While I was talking about minimalism, I was learning the real estate market. While they were hosting galas to cover up their dwindling membership numbers, I was studying the distressed assets of the hospitality industry. I reached out and gripped the cold brass handle of the front door. My palm was steady. My pulse was slow. Inside that room, they were rehearsing their speeches. Vivian would talk about how much they loved me and how this was for my own good. Graham would talk about duty and the weight of the name. Miles would talk about fiscal responsibility, which was rich coming from a man who I knew had leveraged the downtown club 3 times in the last 18 months. They had prepared a script where I was the villain, and they were the benevolent saviors forced to make a hard choice. They expected me to cry. They expected me to beg for my allowance. They expected the girl who wrote in the diary, the girl who just wanted to belong. They were not going to get her. I turned the handle. The latch clicked with a sound like a pistol hammer being cocked. I paused for 1 second on the threshold. The warmth of the foyer hit my face, smelling of beeswax and stagnation. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder. I thought about the black Amex card in my wallet, the one linked to the family trust. They were going to demand it back tonight. They thought that card was the leash that held me. They thought that by cutting it, they would send me spiraling into poverty, forcing me to come crawling back on my knees, ready to be molded into a proper Ellington. I almost smiled. I thought to myself that they believed they were taking back a credit card. They had no idea that tonight, they were preparing to hand over the keys to the kingdom they believed they owned. They were opening the door to the wolf, and they had even set out a chair for her. I pushed the door open and stepped into the light. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind me, sealing the room like a tomb. The air inside the main drawing room was stagnant, smelling of lemon polish and old tension. My family was arranged exactly as I had predicted, sitting in a semicircle of high-backed velvet chairs that looked less like furniture and more like a tribunal bench. To the side, sitting at a small antique desk that had been dragged in for the occasion, was Mr. Calloway, the family attorney. He refused to meet my eyes, busying himself with a stack of thick, cream-colored files. I walked to the single, stiff wooden chair placed in the center of the room. I did not sit. I stood behind it, resting my hands on the backrest, grounding myself against the wood. Graham spoke first. He leaned forward, clasping his hands together in a gesture that was meant to convey paternal concern but only radiated dominance. He cleared his throat. "Allison, we have asked you here because we are deeply worried about you." He paused for effect. "We need to discuss your future." The way he said the word future sounded like a threat. "We need to discuss the image of this family and the honor of the Ellington name." I watched his eyes. They were hard, scanning my face for any sign of weakness. There was no warmth there, only the cold calculation of a man trying to manage a declining asset. Beside him, Vivian shifted in her seat. She was holding a sheet of paper that trembled slightly in her manicured hand. She began to read from it, her voice pitched high and tight. "We have written this intervention letter because we love you, Allison, but we can no longer support your aimless lifestyle. You live without direction. You refuse to take responsibility. You abuse the privileges of this family to fund an unstable existence that brings us nothing but embarrassment." She looked up at me, waiting for the sting to land. I kept my face blank. Lena chimed in immediately, unable to wait for her turn. She smoothed her silk skirt, her expression pinched with disdain. "It is honestly humiliating. Allison, I have to field calls from our club members asking why an Ellington is posting videos about living in shared dormitories in Portugal. You are out there wearing thrift store rags and talking about mental burnout while we are trying to sell exclusive memberships. You are damaging the brand. You are tarnishing the mystique." Miles, sitting on the end, nodded vigorously. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes that expensive concealer could not hide. "We cannot justify the expense anymore. Allison, you are a drain on resources. You contribute nothing to the legacy, yet you swipe the family card as if you earned it. It ends tonight." "Mr. Calloway cleared his throat, signaling the shift from emotional battering to legal execution. He slid a heavy document across the polished mahogany table toward me. "Ms. Vega," he said, using the name I had adopted legally years ago. A slight that was not lost on me. "These documents outline the immediate termination of your access to the family trust. You are being removed from the estate planning and the will. All credit lines associated with the Ellington accounts are to be severed effective immediately." The room fell silent, the heavy velvet drapes absorbing the sound of my sentence. They watched me, waiting for the explosion. They expected the spoiled daughter to scream, to cry, to beg for her allowance. They expected me to fall to my knees and promise to be the daughter they wanted just to keep the money flowing. Instead, I looked around the room. My eyes drifted from their faces to the details of the room itself. I had not been in this drawing room for nearly 2 years. At first glance, it looked as opulent as ever, but then I looked closer. On the mantelpiece, inside a Ming vase that used to hold fresh white lilies delivered daily, sat a large arrangement of hydrangeas. They were stiff. They were too perfect. They were silk. I noticed a thin layer of dust on the petals. Graham Ellington, a man who once fired a housekeeper for leaving a single water spot on a faucet, was displaying dusty, fake flowers in his primary residence. I looked at the silver tray on the low table in front of Vivian. There was a bottle of champagne on ice, intended perhaps for a celebratory toast after they had successfully cut me off. I recognized the label. It was a Prosecco that retailed for $12. The vintage Dom Perignon was gone. I looked down at the Persian rug beneath Miles's feet. It was subtle, but near the fringe. The fibers were worn down to the backing. It was frayed. This rug should have been replaced or restored months ago. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, though I did not let it show on my face. This was not an intervention. This was not about morality. This was not about my vlogs or my lifestyle or the family honor. They were broke. Or if not completely broke, they were bleeding cash so badly that they had to cut costs wherever they could. I was not a moral failing to them. I was a line item on a budget that was deep in the red. They were cutting me off because they literally could not afford me anymore. The fake flowers, the cheap wine, the worn rug, these were the cracks in the dam that they were desperately trying to patch with arrogance and cruelty. Graham stood up, extending his hand. "I will take the American Express black card. Allison, now." The tension in the room spiked. This was the moment of submission. This was where I was supposed to break. I reached into my bag. I pulled out my wallet. I slid the heavy titanium card out of its slot. I did not hesitate. I did not look at it with longing. I placed it gently on the table in front of Mr. Calloway. Then, I reached for the pen lying on top of the documents. I did not read the terms. I did not ask for a lawyer. I did not ask if there was a grace period. I flipped to the back page, found the signature line marked purely for the disowned, and I signed my name, Allison Vega. The scratch of the pen against the paper was the only sound in the room. I straightened up and capped the pen. I looked up to find 4 faces staring at me in absolute shock. Vivian's mouth was slightly open. Miles looked as if he had swallowed a lemon. They had prepared for a war, for a tantrum, for emotional blackmail. They did not know how to handle a business transaction. "Are we done?" I asked. My voice was even, devoid of any tremble. Graham blinked, his composure faltering for the first time. You understand what you have just done? You are walking away with nothing, no support, no safety net. You are on your own, Allison." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the fear behind his bluster. I saw a man trying to hold up the sky with toothpicks. "I understand perfectly," I said. I turned to Mr. Calloway. "Is there anything else to sign?" "No, Ms. Vega," the lawyer stammered, shuffling the papers nervously. "That covers everything." "Good," I said. I picked up my bag. I did not say goodbye. I did not tell them I loved them. I did not offer them the forgiveness they pretended to want. I turned on my heel and walked toward the double doors. My family sat in stunned silence, surrounded by their fading grandeur and their silk flowers. They thought they had just performed a surgery to remove a cancerous tumor. They thought they were lighter now. I grasped the brass handle of the door and stepped out into the hallway. As I walked toward the exit, the ghost of a smile touched my lips. They believed they had just cut off a parasite. They had no idea that they had just severed the very last string holding their mask in place. I was the only one in that room who knew the ship was sinking, and they had just thrown their only life raft overboard. The gravel of the driveway crunched beneath my boots, a sound that felt surprisingly final. I stopped at the guardhouse where Arthur, the family driver for over 20 years, was waiting. He looked at me with sad, weary eyes, holding his cap in his hands. He thought I was walking away in disgrace, a banished child with nowhere to go. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the key fob to the silver sedan I had been driving, the one technically leased under the family holding company. I placed the keys in his palm. "Take care of yourself, Arthur," I said softly. He nodded, looking down at his shoes. "You too, Miss Allison. If you need a ride to the station." I shook my head. My ride is here. I walked past the wrought iron gates and stepped onto the public road. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a bruised purple. 50 yards down the road, a black SUV with tinted windows idled quietly. It was not a flashy limousine. It was an armored vehicle, built for security and silence. As I approached, the rear door swung open. "Good evening, Ms. Vega," the driver said. He did not look at me with pity. He looked at me with the deference one pays to the person who signs the paychecks. I slid into the leather seat, the climate control instantly wrapping me in warmth. I exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that expelled the last of the Ellington House air from my lungs. I pulled out my phone, the cracked iPhone I used for my public persona. I snapped a quick, slightly blurry photo of the darkening road and the distant silhouette of trees. I opened Instagram and typed a caption that fit the narrative perfectly. Sometimes you have to walk away to find your own path. Tonight the wind is my compass. Wandering, letting go, trust the universe. I posted it. Within seconds, the likes began to roll in, accompanied by comments from followers telling me to stay strong and trust the journey. They saw a brave, lost soul. They had no idea. I locked that phone and dropped it into the cup holder. Then, I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a slim, high-powered tablet. I pressed my thumb against the sensor, and the screen flared to life. The interface was sleek, dark mode, with data streams refreshing in real time. At the top left, a discrete logo pulsed gently. Horizon Commons. This was the life I had built in the shadows. Years ago, after running away from the suffocating expectations of my father, I had spent months hopping from luxury hotels to grimy hostels. I realized something fundamental. The luxury hotels were isolating, full of people who refused to make eye contact. The hostels were community-driven but lacked the infrastructure for serious work. There was an entire generation of remote workers, digital nomads, and creatives who were burning out because they had no place that offered both high-level professional facilities and genuine human connection. I did not just start a blog. I started a real estate technology company. I founded Horizon Commons with a simple thesis: take undervalued, aging commercial properties, old warehouses, defunct department stores, forgotten historical buildings, and convert them into hybrid living and working ecosystems. We did not just offer a desk and a bed. We built soundproof podcast studios, meditation gardens, on-site therapy suites, and communal kitchens designed by nutritionists. We sold a lifestyle that combated the very burnout I spoke about in my videos. I chose the name Vega carefully. It was my mother's maiden name. She had died when I was 4. Long before Vivian brought her ice and polish into the house. Vega was the last name of the only person in that house who had ever held me without an agenda. By using it, I severed the final link to the Ellington brand. In the business registry, Allison Ellington did not exist. Allison Vega was the founder and CEO. The car hummed as we sped toward the city. I tapped on the financial dashboard. The numbers were written out in green, soothing and precise. We had just closed our Series C funding round 48 hours ago. The valuation of Horizon Commons now stood at $350 million. My family thought they had cut off a girl who needed an allowance for groceries. They did not know they had just disowned a woman whose net worth rivaled the GDP of a small island nation. We pulled up to the headquarters in the industrial district of the city. It was a converted textile factory. The brick facade preserved but updated with massive steel-framed windows. Inside, there was no marble, no velvet, no pretension. The lobby was flooded with warm light, filled with fiddle-leaf figs and the hum of productivity. I walked through the glass doors. The receptionist, a young man named Leo, looked up and smiled. "Good evening, Ms. Vega. The strategy team is waiting in the glass box." "Thank you." "Leo," I said. As I walked through the open-plan office, people nodded or waved. There was no fear in their eyes. Unlike the staff at Ellington Ridge, who scurried like frightened mice when Graham entered a room. My team respected me because I built this with them. I knew their names. I knew their projects. I was not a distant figurehead. I was the architect of the vision. I entered the conference room we called the Glass Box. My CFO, Naomi, was already there, projecting a map onto the smart wall. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice low. I sat at the head of the table, placing the tablet down. They cut the trust. They took the cards. I am officially a liability they have written off. Naomi smirked, tapping her pen against the table. Their loss is quite literally our gain. Did they suspect anything? Not a thing, I replied. They think I'm going to sleep on a friend's couch tonight. Now, let us look at the acquisition targets. Naomi swiped the screen. The map zoomed in on 3 distinct regions where the hospitality market was crashing. We are looking to acquire 20,000 square feet of distressed assets in the next quarter to expand the Horizon Retreats line, she said. I scanned the list of properties. These were legacy assets, clubs and resorts that had failed to modernize, places that were bleeding money because they refused to adapt to a younger, more conscious demographic. My eyes stopped at 3 highlighted entries near the bottom of the list. Ellington Ridge Estate, North Campus, Ellington Bayside Club, the Highland Links. The status next to them read, High risk, potential default, watch list. I felt a cold thrill run down my spine. It was not the heat of anger. It was the chill of absolute clarity. My family's empire was crumbling not because of bad luck, but because they were obsolete. They were trying to sell exclusivity to a generation that valued inclusivity. They were selling prestige to people who wanted purpose. I tapped the entry for Ellington Ridge. Keep a close eye on this one. I told Naomi, buying the debt on this portfolio is our priority. I want to own the paper they are drowning in. Naomi looked at me, searching for hesitation. You are sure, Allison? This is business, but it is also nuclear. I looked at the map, at the red dots signifying the decay of the Ellington Empire. It is strictly business. Naomi, we need locations with good bones that have been mismanaged. That is exactly what these are. The fact that I grew up in them just means I know exactly where the rot is hidden. We spent the next 2 hours strategizing. We discussed interest rates, zoning laws, and renovation budgets. We spoke in millions and percentages. I was in my element. I was not the disappointing daughter. I was a predator in the water. But unlike my father, I did not hunt for sport. I hunted to clean up the ecosystem. By the time the meeting wrapped up, it was nearly 10 o'clock at night. I stood up and stretched. I'm going to the studio, I said. I need to record the intro for this week's episode while the feeling is still fresh. I walked down the hall to the soundproof recording suites. The silence room was lined with acoustic foam and warm, amber lighting. I sat in front of the microphone and put on the headphones. I could hear my own breathing, steady and calm. I thought about Graham's face when he demanded the credit card. I thought about Vivian's fake sympathy. I thought about the diary of the 15-year-old girl who felt like she was taking up too much space. I leaned into the mic and pressed record. The red light turned on. I did not use a script. I spoke to the hundreds of thousands of people who listened to me for comfort, the people who felt rejected by their own lives. When they do not give you a seat at the table, I said, my voice soft but steel hard, you have 2 choices. You can stand there and cry, begging for a scrap of wood to sit on, or you can walk out the door, go down the street, and build an entire new room. I chose the second option, and let me tell you, the view from here is so much better. I stopped the recording. I looked at the waveform on the screen, a visual representation of my voice. It was strong. It was consistent. It was the only thing in my life that I owed to no one but myself. I saved the file, turned off the lights, and walked out into the hum of my own empire. The next 18 months passed in a blur of time zones and departure gates, to the outside world, to the thousands of people who liked my photos on Instagram. I was living the ultimate free-spirited life. My feed was a curated mosaic of misty mornings in Portland, sun-drenched afternoons in Austin, and snowy retreats in Denver. I posted about the importance of detaching from toxic environments and finding solace in the unknown. I was the poster child for letting go. But the reality was far less poetic and far more calculated. While my followers saw a woman drinking matcha tea in an oversized sweater, the screen of my laptop was rarely open to a video editor. It was almost always locked onto the Bloomberg terminal and industry-specific news aggregators. I was not just traveling, I was hunting. Every city I visited was a strategic choice, a hub where the old world of luxury hospitality was dying and my new world of flexible living was taking root. I watched the Ellington Empire begin to crack from 3,000 miles away. It started slowly, as these things always do. A small headline in a trade journal mentioned that Ellington Estates had missed its quarterly revenue targets for the 3rd time in a row. Then came the whispers on forums for country club members. Longtime patrons were complaining about the decline in service. They posted photos of cracked pool tiles at the Palm Springs location and complained about the quality of the beef at the steakhouse in Scarsdale. I did not just read these complaints. I analyzed them. I purchased expensive access to consumer credit data and hospitality market reports. The picture they painted was catastrophic. The churn rate, the percentage of members canceling their memberships, had spiked to nearly 14% in a single year. In the world of subscription-based luxury, that number was not just bad, it was a death sentence. The demographic that my father and Miles catered to was literally dying out, and they had failed to attract anyone under the age of 50 to replace them. Miles was trying to stop the bleeding, but he was doing it with the desperation of a gambler chasing his losses. Through public filings, I watched him engage in a dizzying array of financial gymnastics. He was taking out short-term, high-interest loans against the equity of the stable clubs to pay for the renovations of the failing ones. He was moving debt around like a shell game, hoping the market would not notice that the P was missing. He called it strategic leverage. I called it a Ponzi scheme of his own making. It was around this time that a new player entered the field. A quiet, nondescript investment firm called Northbridge Equity began appearing in the ledgers. To the casual observer, Northbridge was just another bottom feeder, a vulture fund scavenging for distressed assets in the post-pandemic economy. They specialized in buying toxic debt, loans that banks had given up on collecting and were willing to sell for pennies on the dollar just to get them off their books. Northbridge was aggressive. Wherever a regional bank looked to offload a souring loan from a hospitality group, Northbridge was there with a wire transfer ready. They bought the lien on the industrial laundry equipment used by the entire Ellington chain. They bought the mortgage on the land under the flagship golf course in Georgia. They bought the outstanding credit line for the fleet of luxury golf carts. Nobody at Ellington Estates paid much attention to Northbridge. To them, debt was just a nuisance, a line item to be ignored until the lawyers got involved. They had no idea who was behind the curtain. If they had dug deep enough, through the layers of bureaucracy, they would have hit a wall. Northbridge was owned by a holding company in Delaware, which was owned by a trust in the Cayman Islands, which was managed by a law firm in Zurich. But if you had the single, physical key to the safe deposit box in that Zurich office, you would find the incorporation papers, and at the bottom of those papers, signed in blue ink, was the name of the sole beneficiary, Allison Vega. I was Northbridge. Every time Miles missed a payment, every time he renegotiated terms with a frustrated bank manager, he was unknowingly tightening the noose I had placed around his neck. I was not just watching them fail. I was buying the rights to their failure. The irony was delicious. While I was secretly becoming their largest creditor, I was also becoming their tenant. In Chicago, there was an old Ellington City Club, a massive, dusty building that had been bleeding money for 5 years. Miles was desperate to monetize the empty space. He listed 3 floors for lease. A real estate broker, acting on behalf of a confidential technology client, approached the Ellington leasing team. They offered a 10-year lease at a premium rate to convert the space into a modern co-living and co-working hub. Miles was ecstatic. He boasted in the quarterly newsletter about modernizing the portfolio and bringing in fresh revenue streams. He signed the lease without ever meeting the tenant. 6 months later, those 3 floors opened as the newest flagship location of Horizon Commons. I walked through the space on opening day. We had stripped away the heavy velvet curtains and dark wood paneling, replacing them with floor-to-ceiling glass, hydroponic green walls, and ergonomic furniture. The space was alive with young entrepreneurs, coders, and artists, the exact demographic my father said I was foolish for chasing. I stood in the center of the atrium, sipping a coffee. Above me, on the executive floor, the old Ellington portrait still hung in the private members' lounge, guarding a room full of empty leather chairs. Below, in the space I rented, the future was being built. I was paying rent to my brother, which he was likely using to pay interest on a loan that I now owned. The money was moving in a perfect circle, leaving my pocket and eventually returning to it, stripping them of equity with every revolution. I never posted about the acquisition of the debt or the success of the Chicago location. On social media, I posted a video of myself walking along a foggy beach. Letting go is not about losing. I told the camera, my voice calm and soothing, it is about realizing that you do not need to hold on to things that weigh you down. Sometimes, you have to let the old structures collapse so you can see the sky again. The comments section flooded with heart emojis and thanks. You are so right. Allison. They wrote, your family does not know what they lost. I sat in my hotel room that night, the glow of the laptop illuminating my face. A notification popped up on my secure email server. The subject line was stark and capitalized. Confirmation of transfer. Tranche D. I opened it. It was the final piece of the puzzle. My legal team had successfully acquired the senior secured debt on the Ellington Ridge estate itself. The headquarters, the family home, the crown jewel. The bank had finally lost patience with Miles's late payments and sold the note to Northbridge. I stared at the screen. The number at the bottom of the document was staggering. $40 million of debt, purchased for $22 million. I reached out and touched the screen, tracing the name of the property. 18 months ago, they had sat in a circle and told me I was worthless. They had taken my credit card and told me I was cut off from the family assets. They thought they were the gatekeepers. They thought they held the keys to the castle. A small smile touched my lips, but it did not reach my eyes. They had crossed out my name from the list of heirs. They had removed me from the will. They had erased me from the legacy. But now, my name was on the one document that mattered more than a birth certificate or a trust fund. My name was in the column marked lender. My name was on the mortgage. I was no longer the daughter they had abandoned. I was the bank they could not pay. I closed the laptop, the snap of the lid sounding like a gavel hitting a sounding block. The intervention was over. The foreclosure was about to begin. It was a Tuesday night, raining hard against the metal roof of the converted warehouse that served as my headquarters. I was alone in the soundproof booth, the rest of the Horizon Commons staff having gone home hours ago. The recording light was a steady, unblinking red eye. I leaned into the microphone, my voice low and steady. "When family ceases to be a safe harbor," I said, pausing to let the silence do the heavy lifting, "we often feel like we are drifting at sea without an anchor. We are told that blood is thicker than water. We are told that you cannot choose your family. But what happens when the house you grew up in becomes the very thing that suffocates you? Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is burn the map they gave you and navigate by your own stars." I was about to segue into a segment about setting boundaries during the holidays when my phone, placed face down on the mixing desk, began to vibrate. I frowned. Nobody called this line this late. I flipped it over. The screen lit up with a single name, Vivian. My breath hitched in my throat. It had been nearly 2 years since that night in the drawing room. 2 years of absolute radio silence. No birthday cards, no Christmas texts. Just the void where a mother figure should have been. I stared at the screen for 3 rings, debating whether to let it go to voicemail, but curiosity, cold and sharp, won out. I tapped the green icon and brought the phone to my ear. "Hello, Vivian," I said. I did not ask how she was. "Allison," she replied. Her voice was not warm. It did not carry the tremor of a mother reaching out to an estranged child. It sounded like she was ordering a latte that was taking too long. "We need you to come home." "Home?" I repeated, the word tasting like ash. "I thought we established I did not have a home there anymore." "Don't be difficult," she snapped, her facade cracking instantly. "Your father, Graham is not well. The doctors say it is his heart. The stress of the business, the legacy, it is taking a toll on him." She paused, waiting for me to gasp, to ask for details, to panic. When I remained silent, she continued, her tone shifting to something more bureaucratic. "We are holding a gathering this weekend, a family healing and intervention weekend. It will be at Ellington Ridge. We have brought in a facilitator. We are going to discuss the future of the estate and your place in it. We want to put this ugliness behind us. We want to be a family again." I almost laughed. Family healing and intervention weekend. It sounded like a corporate retreat for a failing department. The irony was suffocating. They were using the exact same language they had used to disown me, repurposing it to reel me back in. They were not calling because they missed me. They were calling because the walls were closing in, and they needed a scapegoat, or perhaps a savior, though they did not know I was the latter. "When?" I asked. "Friday evening, 6 o'clock. Do not be late. Allison, this is important." "I will be there," I said. "Good," she said, and the line went dead. I lowered the phone. A normal person might have felt a surge of hope, a foolish belief that their parents had finally seen the light. I felt nothing of the sort. I felt the cold click of a trap springing shut. But this time, I was not the mouse. I was the one holding the cheese. I saved the podcast file, closed the recording software, and immediately opened my secure email client. I typed 2 addresses, my lead counsel and my chief financial officer. Subject: Operation Northbridge, Ellington Protocol. Body: They have called the meeting. Initiate the final review. I want every single loan document, every lien, and every foreclosure trigger ready by 8 tomorrow morning. Meet me in the war room. I hit send. The next morning, the war room at Horizon Commons was buzzing with a quiet, lethal energy. The walls were covered in digital displays, projecting the intricate web of the Ellington Empire. It looked like a patient on life support, with red warning lights flashing on nearly every organ. Naomi, my COO, and the only person who knew the full emotional weight of this vendetta, stood by the main screen. She looked tired, but sharp. "You realize what they are doing, right?" Naomi asked, pointing to the timeline. "They are calling this a healing weekend, but look at the timing. They have a balloon payment of $4 million due on the West Coast clubs next Tuesday. They don't have the cash. They are bringing you in to either beg you for money or to coerce you into signing something that leverages your trust fund, which they forgot they already cut off." "They are desperate," I said, sipping my black coffee. Vivian sounded like she was reading from a teleprompter. "They need a narrative. If the empire falls, they need to say they tried everything, including reaching out to the prodigal daughter." "And if you go there," Naomi said, her voice softening, "you are walking right back into the blast zone. Allison, are you sure you can handle this? I am not talking about the business. I know you can buy and sell them 10 times over. I am talking about the girl who wrote that diary. Graham knows exactly which buttons to push to make you feel small. If he plays the dying father card, will you hesitate?" I looked at the map. I looked at the red dots that represented the debt I owned. I looked at the sheer magnitude of their incompetence. "I am not going there to save them, Naomi," I said, "and I am not going there to destroy them just for the sake of it. I need them to see. I need them to look at the entire picture that they have willfully ignored for decades. I need them to understand that the daughter they threw away is the only thing standing between them and total ruin." "So, it is a rescue mission?" Naomi asked. "No," I corrected her. "It is a hostile takeover, but I'm taking over the narrative, not just the buildings." We spent the next 6 hours preparing. This was not packing for a weekend getaway. This was preparing for a merger and acquisition trial. We printed out binders of documents. We prepared 2 separate legal strategies. Plan A: the family accepts reality, steps down, and allows me to restructure the company under Horizon Commons, saving their reputation but stripping their power. Plan B: they fight, they deny, and I execute the foreclosure clauses that would lock the gates of Ellington Ridge within 24 hours. I held the fate of my heritage in a manila folder. Friday afternoon arrived with a sky the color of slate. I chose my outfit carefully. I did not wear the power suits I wore to board meetings. I did not wear the designer heels I could now easily afford. I wore a simple beige sweater, jeans, and a pair of worn boots. I drove the same silver sedan I had leased myself years ago. I needed them to see Allison the vlogger, Allison the failure, Allison the girl who needed fixing. The shock would be far more effective if they underestimated me until the very last second. I drove alone, no entourage, no lawyers in the back seat. They were on standby. A phone call away, stationed at a hotel 10 miles from the estate. As I turned onto the familiar winding road leading to Ellington Ridge, my heart did hammer against my ribs. I could not lie to myself about that. The body remembers trauma even when the mind has healed. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight as the iron gates came into view. The landscaping was still impeccable, likely paid for by credit cards that were maxed out. The house loomed large and imposing, a fortress of old money and older secrets. I pulled up to the front entrance. There was no valet this time. The driveway was empty. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I did not see the scared 22-year-old girl who had left in tears. I saw a woman who had built a kingdom from scratch. I saw the CEO of a company valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. 2 years ago, I whispered to the reflection, they staged an intervention to cut me out. They wanted to amputate the limb to save the body. I turned off the engine. The silence of the car was absolute. "Tonight," I continued, "I am the intervention. I am the surgeon. And I'm going to show them that the body is already dead. And I am the only one who knows how to perform the resurrection." I grabbed the thick leather bag from the passenger seat. It contained the proof of their demise and the blueprint for their survival. I stepped out into the chill evening air, slammed the door shut, and walked toward the house that was no longer my home, but was about to become my property. I arrived at Ellington Ridge on Saturday afternoon. The late autumn sun was low in the sky, casting a golden, forgiving light over the estate, to the untrained eye. The property still looked like a postcard of American aristocracy. The hedges were trimmed, and the fountain in the circular driveway was running. But as I stepped out of my car and walked toward the massive double doors, I noticed what the golden light was trying to hide. The brass kickplate on the bottom of the door was tarnished, lacking the mirror finish it had maintained for decades. Inside the foyer, the air was cooler than usual, a sign that they were rationing the heating. I handed my coat to a staff member I did not recognize. The team was skeleton thin. In the past, there would have been 3 people greeting guests. Today, there was just one flustered young man. I walked past the main bar. It was empty. The crystal decanters on the back shelf were arranged beautifully, but I knew the trick. I saw that 3 of the bottles were filled with colored water, a stage prop used when the inventory budget had dried up. The real Macallan 25 was gone. They led me to the solarium this time, a room with high glass walls overlooking the golf course. They had arranged the seating in a circle, just like the last time, but the vibe was different. There was a box of tissues on a small central table. A professionally printed sign on an easel read, "Family Healing Session." My family was already seated: Graham, Vivian, Lena, and Miles. But there was a stranger with them, a man in a sharp gray suit with a notepad on his knee. He introduced himself as Dr. Kellerman, a family intervention specialist, and sitting slightly apart from the circle, watching with a predatory stillness, was another man I did not know yet. He was older, perhaps 60, with silver hair and a tan that spoke of permanent vacation. Dr. Kellerman began the session with a voice like warm syrup. He thanked me for coming. He spoke about the bravery of facing one's demons. Then, he opened a folder, Vivian's dossier on me, and started to dismantle my character. He described my life as a series of self-destructive episodes. He framed my travel as chronic avoidance. He called my independence a fear of attachment, and my career, which he clearly did not understand, as a refusal to accept the responsibilities of my station. He used words like flight risk and emotional immaturity. I sat there, hands folded in my lap, listening. I did not interrupt. I watched his mouth move and thought about how much his hourly fee must be costing the dwindling family accounts. Then came the letters. Vivian went first. She did not look at me. She looked at the tissue box. She spoke about the humiliation she felt at the club. She said that when the other wives asked about Allison, she had to lie. She said I was selfish for making her feel like a failure as a mother because I refused to be a debutante. Lena followed. She held her letter with perfectly manicured fingers. She complained that my grungy aesthetic on social media was confusing the marketplace. She said that by talking about burnout and mental health, I was implying that the Ellington lifestyle, the very product she was selling, was toxic. She said I was sabotaging her hard work. Miles was the most transparent. He did not talk about feelings. He talked about pressure. He looked at me with genuine anger and said that I had no idea what it took to keep the lights on. He said I was out there playing tourist while he was drowning in spreadsheets. He projected his own incompetence onto me, blaming my absence for the financial rot he had overseen. I listened to all of it. Occasionally, a small smile touched my lips. It was not a smile of mockery. It was the smile of someone recognizing a pattern. Every single thing they accused me of was a confession of their own terror. Vivian feared irrelevance. Lena feared inauthenticity. Miles feared failure. They were just hanging their fears on me like coats on a rack. When the letters were done, the room fell silent. Dr. Kellerman looked at me, expecting a breakdown. I said nothing. Vivian cleared her throat. She wiped a dry eye and shifted gears. The transition from grieving mother to business broker was so sharp it almost caused whiplash. She gestured to the silver-haired man in the corner. "This is Mr. Halden," she said. "Mr. Halden is a longtime admirer of the Ellington legacy. He is a very successful investor in the luxury sector." "Mr. Halden nodded to me. His eyes did not look at my face. They assessed me like I was a piece of prime real estate. Vivian continued. She explained that the family had been through a hard time, but there was a path forward. Mr. Halden was willing to inject a capital investment of $50 million into Ellington Estates. It was enough to clear the immediate debts and renovate the flagship properties. But there was a condition. Mr. Halden spoke for the first time. His voice was deep and gravelly. He said he believed in stories. He said the market loved a comeback story. He wanted to rebrand the estate, and he wanted a face for that campaign. He wanted the prodigal daughter to return. He looked at me and laid it out. He wanted me to step in as the public face of the new Ellington. He wanted me to give up my platform, merge my brand with theirs, and move back to the estate. And then, he dropped the final clause. He suggested that a strategic personal alliance would solidify the trust of the market. He was suggesting a marriage, or at least a very public, very contractual partnership between him and me. I felt a coldness settle in my stomach. They were not just asking for my help. They were selling me. I was the sweetener in the deal. I was the livestock included with the farm. They framed it as redemption. Vivian beamed, saying this was my chance to be accepted again, to be forgiven for my years of wandering. Graham leaned forward. His face was gray, but his eyes were hard. He looked at me and delivered the line that was supposed to close the deal. Sacrifice is what a family member does for the legacy. Allison, he said, it is time you paid your dues. The room waited. They thought they had cornered me. They thought I was destitute, desperate for approval, and broke. I looked at Mr. Halden. I looked at the therapist. I looked at my parents. I asked one simple question. If I refuse? The silence that followed was heavy. Dr. Kellerman shifted in his seat and started talking about toxic choices and the danger of burning bridges. Vivian started to cry again, talking about how I was breaking her heart. But nobody answered the question, because the answer was that if I refused, they were finished. They had no plan B. I stood up, I walked over to the window and looked out at the darkening golf course. I turned back to face them. My gaze lingered on Mr. Halden, the man who thought he could buy a wife and a company in a single transaction. I looked at Graham. You call this an intervention, I said, my voice steady and clear. You brought a doctor here to treat my addiction to freedom, but you have misdiagnosed the patient. I picked up my bag. The addict in this room is not me, I said. The addict is this family. You are addicted to a version of power that died 20 years ago, and you are willing to sell your own blood to get one last hit of it. I walked toward the door. Behind me, the silence was absolute, save for the sound of Mr. Halden closing his portfolio, the sound of a deal falling apart. The transition from the solarium to the private dining room was a shuffle of silent tension. We sat at the long mahogany table, the one where we had celebrated Christmases before I was exiled. The lighting was low, the chandelier dimmed to a warm, amber glow that was designed to flatter the complexion and hide the dust. But as I unfolded my napkin, I noticed the cracks in the facade that the darkness could not conceal. I picked up my fork. It was heavy sterling silver, etched with the family crest, a piece from the original set my grandfather had commissioned. But the knife next to it was different. It was lighter, the steel slightly brighter, a modern reproduction. I glanced down the table. The water goblets were mismatched, some Waterford crystal, some generic glass. Even the chair beneath me, one of the high-backed velvet seats reserved for guests, had a wobble in the left leg. They were cannibalizing the estate to set this table. They were pulling mismatched pieces from different sets, hoping the glitter of the candlelight would blind Mr. Halden to the fact that the inventory was incomplete. It was a perfect metaphor for the family itself. Dinner was served by a catering service, not a private chef. The silence was filled by the clinking of cutlery and Mr. Halden's voice. He had recovered from my rejection in the solarium, or perhaps he simply chose to ignore it, assuming that money would eventually drown out my principles. He swirled his red wine, looking at me with a gaze that felt like he was appraising a racehorse. "You have built quite a following. Allison," he said, "we have been analyzing the demographics. The wellness sector is booming. My vision is to pivot Ellington Estates away from just golf and cigars. We want to launch Ellington Retreats, high-end, holistic wellness." He leaned in, his cufflink catching the light. "But a brand needs a story," he continued, "and you are the story. The wayward daughter returning to her roots to heal the family legacy. It is poetic. It is marketable. If you stabilize your image, stop the wandering, settle down here, you could be the face of $100 million pivot." I took a sip of water. He was talking about me like I was a marketing asset to be amortized. Graham, sitting at the head of the table, cut into his steak with aggressive force. He did not look at me. He spoke to the room, his voice booming with the assumption of authority he no longer possessed. "The deal makes sense," Graham said. "Allison will do the right thing. She has had her fun running around the world, playing at being poor, but she knows where she belongs. She owes this family more than she realizes. We gave her everything. It is time she paid back the investment." The words hit me in the center of my chest. She owes this family. For a second, the old Allison wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the wine in his face and list every birthday he missed, every cruel word he said about my writing, every time he made me feel small so he could feel big. But I was not that girl anymore. I was a CEO. And CEOs do not scream at the dinner table. They look at the data. I reached down to my tote bag, which I had placed by my feet. I pulled out my iPad Pro. The screen illuminated my face with a cool blue light, cutting through the warm, fake atmosphere of the room. I ignored Graham. I turned my head slightly and looked at my brother. "Miles," I said, my voice soft but cutting clearly across the table. "Before we discuss my role as the face of this new venture, I have a few questions about the last quarterly report." Miles froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. "What?" I tapped the screen, scrolling through a document. "I am looking at the membership retention figures." I said, "You reported a churn rate of 4% to the board, but according to the raw data from the billing processor, the actual cancellation rate for the last 12 months is hovering closer to 19%. Can you explain that discrepancy?" The room went deadly quiet. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the server's pantry. Miles put his fork down. The color drained from his face. Those are internal projections. Allison, you are misinterpreting the data. We had a seasonal dip. It is standard in the industry." I swiped left. "A seasonal dip doesn't explain the debt service coverage ratio." I continued, "Your operating income is currently covering less than 60% of your interest payments. Technically, that puts 3 of the 5 clubs in immediate default status with the lenders. How are you keeping the lights on? Miles, are you capitalizing the interest?" Mr. Halden stopped swirling his wine. He set the glass down. He looked at Miles, then at Graham. His brow furrowed. "Allison, this is hardly the place," Graham snapped, his face reddening. "Put that away. We are having dinner." I did not put it away. I looked at Halden. "Mr. Halden, surely you have seen the schedule of repayment?" I asked. "The balloon payment on the West Coast portfolio is due in 90 days. $4 million. Based on the cash flow statements I'm looking at, the estate has less than $300,000 in liquid assets." Miles slammed his hand on the table. "Where are you getting this? This is confidential company data. You are hacking us." "I am not hacking anything," I said calmly. "This is all available if you know where to look in the secondary credit markets." I turned the iPad around so the screen faced the table. I had pulled up a spreadsheet that was dense with numbers, rows and rows of red ink. Let's talk about the debt structure, I said. I pointed to a column. You didn't just borrow from major banks, Miles. When the Tier 1 lenders cut you off last year, you started packaging your debt and selling it to private equity firms and smaller regional banks. High interest, adjustable rates, predatory terms. I read from the screen. On March 12th, you sold the lien on the golf course maintenance facility. On April 4th, you leveraged the liquor license of the New York club. On May 10th, you took out a bridge loan against the artwork in this very house. Vivian gasped. She looked at the paintings on the walls as if they were about to dissolve. That is a lie, she cried out, her voice shrill. That is just gossip. You are reading fake news from those terrible blogs. Graham would never mortgage the art. Graham said nothing. He was staring at the tablecloth, his jaw clenched tight. I swiped the screen again. A new graphic appeared. It was a pie chart showing the consolidation of the Ellington debt. Mr. Halden, I said, addressing the investor directly. You are a smart man. You value due diligence. Has the family informed you that over 70% of their outstanding debt, the mortgages, the operational loans, the credit lines, has been quietly purchased over the last 18 months by a single entity? Halden turned his head slowly to look at Graham. Is this true? He asked. The gravel in his voice was gone, replaced by the sharpness of a man realizing he is walking into a trap. Graham stuttered. We have many partners. The debt is diversified. Allison doesn't know what she is talking about. She is a travel vlogger, for God's sake. I tapped the screen one last time. The logo of Northbridge Equity appeared in crisp, bold letters, followed by a list of 42 separate loan instruments. Northbridge Equity. I said, they are an investment firm that specializes in distressed hospitality assets. They don't just hold a piece of the pie. Graham, they own the bakery. I looked around the table. The shock was palpable. They were looking at me, the girl they thought was filming makeup tutorials in hostel bathrooms, and realizing I was speaking a language they barely understood. I was reciting the autopsy report of their business while it was still breathing. I looked Halden in the eye. If you invest $50 million today, I said, you are not buying a turnaround story. You are paying off Northbridge Equity. And since Northbridge holds the senior secured position on every meaningful asset, including the chair you are sitting on, they can foreclose the moment a single covenant is breached, which, according to my math, happened about 3 weeks ago. I leaned forward. If you knew that one single creditor held the power to seize this entire estate tomorrow morning, and the family never told you, would you still want to write that check? Halden sat back. He looked at the family he had been ready to save. He saw Miles sweating. He saw Graham's inability to meet his eyes. He saw the mismatched silverware and the frantic desperation. He did not answer. He did not have to. The silence was an answer. I folded the cover of my iPad. The blue light vanished, returning the room to the dim, deceptive glow of the chandelier. I picked up my napkin and placed it gently on the table. It seems, I said, my voice quiet but filling the room, that the intervention tonight is targeting the wrong person. The one who needs to face reality isn't the one sitting in this chair. I stood up. The sound of my chair scraping against the floor was the only noise in the room, loud and jarring, like a gunshot in a library. The silence that followed the scraping of my chair was shattered instantly by Miles. He did not just stand up. He exploded upward, knocking his wineglass over. The dark red liquid pooled on the white tablecloth like a fresh wound, but nobody moved to clean it up. "You have been spying on us," Miles shouted, his voice cracking with a mixture of fear and adolescence. "You have been hacking into my private servers. That is illegal. Allison, you are reading proprietary data that you do not have the clearance to understand. You think because you run some little hostel company that you understand high finance? You do not know the first thing about leverage or debt structuring." He was panting. His face flushed a blotchy red. He was trying to wrestle control of the narrative back to the only ground he knew, the idea that I was the incompetent little sister and he was the financial wizard. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself against the accusation of espionage. I simply reached into my oversized leather tote bag again. This time, I did not pull out an iPad. I pulled out a physical file. It was thick, bound in a heavy navy blue cover with a legal spine. I walked around the edge of the table, the sound of my boots heavy on the floorboards, and placed the file directly in the center of the table, right between the centerpiece of dying flowers and the basket of bread rolls. It landed with a heavy, dull thud. "That is not hacked data." "Miles," I said, my voice cool and devoid of emotion, "that is a notice of default and intent to foreclose. It was filed with the county clerk this morning. It names Ellington Ridge Estate, the Bayside Club, and the Highland Links as the collateral properties." I looked at my watch. "It becomes executable in exactly 48 hours. Graham turned a shade of pale gray that I had never seen on a living human before. He reached out with a trembling hand and flipped open the cover. His eyes darted across the legal jargon, the bold headers, the inescapable reality printed on bond paper. He looked up at me, desperation warring with his lifelong arrogance. "Northbridge wouldn't do this," he said, his voice shaking but trying to find its old booming cadence. "We have a relationship with them. They are a strategic partner. They know the value of the Ellington brand. They would not liquidate a 100-year-old legacy for a temporary cash flow issue. They know we are good for it." He looked at me with a pitiful sort of condescension. "You do not understand how these firms work. Allison, they rattle the saber to get better terms. They don't actually drop the guillotine." I looked at him. For 32 years, I had called this man Dad, or Father, or Sir. I had looked for his approval in every report card, every milestone, every breath I took. "Graham," I said. The use of his first name hit him harder than the legal document. He flinched. "Have you ever actually performed a background check on Northbridge Equity?" I asked softly. "Have you ever looked past the Delaware address? Have you ever asked your lawyers to trace the ownership chain to the very bottom?" He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. "Of course not. It is a private equity firm. They are anonymous by design." I reached into the file Graham was holding. I pulled out a single sheet of paper from the back. It was a flowchart. It was simple, brutal, and undeniable. I traced the line with my index finger, holding it up for the table to see. "It starts here," I explained, pointing to the top box, "Northbridge Equity, Delaware, wholly owned by Obsidian Holdings, Cayman Islands." I moved my finger down, "which is managed by the indistinctly named Zurich Trust Group." I paused. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the electric candles. "And the sole beneficiary of the Zurich Trust Group, the individual who holds 100% of the controlling interest, is a holding company called Vega Ventures." I looked at Vivian. I looked at Lena. I looked at Miles. Finally, I locked eyes with Graham. "You are not negotiating with a nameless vulture fund. Graham, you are not dealing with a computer algorithm or a board of strangers." I leaned in closer, my palms resting on the table. "You are sitting across from the person who bought your debt for pennies on the dollar, because she knew exactly when you would fail. I am Northbridge." The silence that descended on the room was absolute. It was not the silence of peace. It was the vacuum of space. It was the sound of a world imploding. Vivian let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She pressed a napkin to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. "Allison," she whispered, her voice trembling, You are playing a game with your own family? This is cruel. This is sick. How could you do this to us? We raised you. We gave you this life." I cut her off. My voice was like a whip crack. "Do not talk to me about raising me," I said. "Do not talk to me about family. 2 years ago, you sat in a circle in the other room and you cut me out like a cancer. You stripped me of my name, my inheritance, and my home. You did it without blinking. You did it to save your balance sheet." I gestured to the blue folder. "I am just returning the favor. I am treating this exactly how you taught me to treat it, as a business decision. You were a failing investment, so I bought you out." "Mr. Halden stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. He buttoned his suit jacket with a sharp, decisive movement. He looked at the folder on the table, then at Graham, who was now slumped in his chair, looking small and defeated. Halden realized he had walked into a slaughterhouse thinking it was a petting zoo. He had almost signed a check for $50 million to a family that was effectively bankrupt, to save a property that was already owned by the woman sitting across from him. "It appears," Halden said, his voice icy with professional disdain, "that I am the extra person in this room." He looked at Graham. "You told me you had a liquidity problem. Graham, you did not tell me you were insolvent. There is a difference." He did not say goodbye. He did not shake hands. He turned and walked out of the dining room, his footsteps echoing down the hallway until the front door clicked shut. We were alone, the Ellington family and their executioner. Graham looked up at me. His eyes were wet. He looked old. The Titan was gone, replaced by a frightened man. "We did it. We did it for the family. Allison," he stammered, grasping at the straws of his own delusion. "When we cut you off, it was to protect the legacy. We thought, if we streamlined the trust, we could save the estate. It was a sacrifice. Heroes make sacrifices." He was still trying to spin it. He was still trying to be the noble patriarch making hard choices. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I felt no anger. I felt no sadness. I felt only a profound, hollow clarity. I picked up the blue folder. I held it against my chest. "You threw me to the edge." "Graham," I said slowly, ensuring every word landed. "You pushed me out to the periphery because you thought I didn't fit the center. You thought you were punishing me." I looked around the room, at the frayed rug, the mismatched glass, the silk flowers gathering dust. "You didn't understand that from the edge. You get a much better view. From the outside, I could see every crack in the foundation that you were frantically trying to paint over. You were so busy pretending to be kings inside the castle that you didn't notice the walls were crumbling." I turned to leave. "You have 48 hours, I said. "The lawyers will be in touch in the morning to discuss the surrender of the deed." I walked out of the dining room, leaving my family sitting in the ruins of the dinner they couldn't afford, in the house they no longer owned. The silence in the dining room was physical, a heavy blanket that smothered the air. After Mr. Halden left, the energy in the room did not just dissipate, it collapsed. I stood at the head of the table, clutching the blue folder, while my family sat in the wreckage of their pretenses. A silver spoon clinked against a crystal water glass, the sound sharp and jarring, triggered by Miles's trembling hand. It was the only noise in a room that felt like a funeral home. I looked at Graham. The man who had terrorized my teenage years with a single raised eyebrow was gone. In his place sat an old man, his shoulders slumped, his face gray and slack. He looked as if he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Lena and Miles were staring at the tablecloth, unable to lift their heads, stripped of the arrogance that usually armored them. For a moment, the room blurred. In my mind, I was 15 years old again. Sitting on the bottom step of the grand staircase just outside this room, I could hear them inside, laughing, clinking glasses, discussing the future of the estate. I sat there for 2 hours, waiting for someone to notice I was missing, waiting for someone to call my name. Nobody ever did. I remembered the time I tried to talk to them about how tired I felt, how the pressure was making my chest hurt. Graham had laughed and called me sensitive. Vivian had told me to stop being dramatic. They had dismissed my pain as a character flaw. I felt a surge of hot, vindictive anger rising in my throat. I had the power right now to make them feel exactly as small and invisible as I had felt on those stairs. Then, Naomi's voice echoed in my head, clear and grounded, cutting through the red haze of my rage. "You can crush them with a signature. Allison, you can turn the lights off tomorrow. But then what? You are going to be standing in the dark, holding a box of matches, staring at a pile of ash. Is that the victory you want? Do you want to look back at your childhood home and see a crater?" Graham broke the silence. He did not shout. He did not command. He spoke in a voice I had never heard him use before, a voice that was cracked and pleading. Please, he whispered. He looked up at me, his eyes wet. Don't wipe it all away. Allison, don't burn down what your grandfather built just because you are angry with me. The mention of my grandfather hit a nerve I thought was dead. Graham was an egoist, but my grandfather had been a builder. He was the one who taught me how to play chess in the library. He was the one who walked with me through the gardens, telling me the names of the trees. And underneath that memory was a fainter one, a ghost of a sensation, my biological mother, holding me on the back porch, humming a song I could no longer remember but could still feel. If I foreclosed tomorrow, the bank agents would come. They would catalog everything, the chess set, the porch swing, the library books. It would all be auctioned off to strangers. I would be erasing the only parts of this place that had ever felt like mine. Vivian saw my hesitation. She mistook it for weakness. She leaned forward, her face twisting into a mask of desperate hope. See, Allison, she said, her voice shaking, we can fix this. You can still do the right thing for the family. We can start over. You can sign an extension, and we can... I held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. Do the right thing, I repeated. That is your favorite phrase, Vivian. But in your dictionary, doing the right thing has always meant me setting myself on fire to keep you warm. It meant me disappearing so I wouldn't embarrass you. It meant me sacrificing my sanity to maintain your image. I walked back to the table and placed both hands on the cool wood. I am not here to pay you back for raising me, I said, my voice hard as flint. I am not here to be the savior who wipes your debt so you can go back to pretending you are royalty, and I am certainly not here to sell myself to some investor to fund your lifestyle. I looked at each of them. I am here to decide what Ellington Estates becomes, because right now, it is a corpse, and I am the only one who sees a way to breathe life back into it, but it will not be the life you know. I took a breath. You have 2 roads ahead of you tonight. Option A is the default. I walk out of here. My lawyers file the paperwork at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. By noon. The locks will be changed. You will be evicted. The assets will be liquidated to pay the creditors. You will lose everything. The house, the cars, the club memberships. You will likely have to sell your personal jewelry and art just to pay your own legal fees. You will be destitute, and the Ellington name will be a cautionary tale in the business journals. Miles made a choking sound. Lena covered her mouth with her hand. Or, I continued, there is option B. I paused, letting the possibility hang in the air. We restructure, but this is not a partnership. This is a takeover. Horizon Commons, my company, absorbs Ellington Estates. We keep the land. We keep the buildings. We keep the history. But the business model changes. We strip out the exclusivity. We tear down the gates. We turn this place into something real, something sustainable. I looked at Graham. But there are conditions, brutal conditions. You keep the roof over your head, and you keep a modest stipend. But the days of black cards and private jets are over. You survive, but you do not rule. I turned away from them and walked to the large French doors that looked out over the golf course. The night was dark, the moon hidden behind clouds. I could see my own reflection in the glass, superimposed over the shadowy outline of the estate. I spoke to the reflection, to the audience that had followed my journey, and to the part of myself that was still hurting. I have dreamed of this moment for years, I said softly. I dreamed of seeing them standing in the driveway with their suitcases, crying, knowing how it felt to be cast out. I wanted to see them destroyed. I watched my reflection's eyes. They were tired, but they were clear. But standing here, holding the match, I realized that ash is just ash. It does not heal anything. I do not want to see them ruined. I want something much more difficult for them. I want to see them live in the world that I built. I want them to wake up every day and realize that the girl they rejected is the roof over their heads. I turned back to the room. They were watching me like prisoners waiting for the warden's verdict. I do not choose to burn the house down, I said, my voice ringing with finality. I walked back to the chair at the head of the table, Graham's chair, and rested my hand on it. I choose to take it apart. I choose to remove every rotten brick, every termite-infested beam, and I choose to rebuild it with a new name. And the price of your survival is that you are going to help me. You are going to work in the house that you once told me I was not good enough to enter. I looked down at Graham, who was staring at his hands. Prepare your pens, I said. We have a lot of paperwork to sign. And this time, nobody is leaving the room until the deal is done. I reached into my bag for the final time. The leather was cool under my fingers, grounding me in the reality of what I was about to do. I pulled out 4 separate documents, each stapled and bound in crisp white paper. I walked around the table, placing one set in front of each family member. The sound of the paper hitting the wood was sharp, like the crack of a gavel. These are not negotiation drafts, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the hollow silence of the dining room. These are employment contracts, and attached to the back of each is a transfer of assets agreement. I walked back to the head of the table and stood behind Graham's chair, the spot he had occupied for 40 years. Horizon Commons, acting through its subsidiary Northbridge Equity, is prepared to acquire 100% of the assets of Ellington Estates. I explained. We will take the land, the clubhouses, the brand, and the debt. In exchange, the foreclosure proceedings will be halted immediately. The embarrassment of a public bankruptcy will be avoided. I paused, looking at their faces. They were listening with the desperate intensity of drowning sailors watching a lifeboat approach. But the structure of the company changes tonight, I continued. The board of directors is dissolved. The executive team is terminated. The ownership is transferred to me. And you 4 are no longer the masters of this universe. You are now employees. Graham looked down at the paper in front of him. His hands were shaking so badly that the pages rattled against the table. Read Clause 4, Graham, I said softly. He squinted at the text. I saw his lips move as he read the words that ended his reign. Effective immediately, I recited from memory. Graham Ellington will step down as chairman and CEO. You are stripped of all voting rights. You are placed on mandatory retirement. I leaned in closer. And there is an addendum regarding housing. You have 30 days to vacate the main residence at Ellington Ridge. This house is being converted into the central reception and co-working hub for the new campus. Graham looked up, his eyes wide with shock. Leave? But this is my home. I built this. You mortgaged this, I corrected him. And then you lost it. If you sign, you receive a modest monthly stipend, enough to rent a comfortable condo in town, perhaps near the golf course you used to own. You get to keep your health insurance. You get to retire with your dignity intact, and the world will think you stepped down gracefully to focus on your health. I pointed to the document. If you do not sign, the stipend vanishes, the insurance vanishes, and the foreclosure notice goes up on the front gate tomorrow morning. I turned to Vivian. She was staring at the contract as if it were a venomous snake. Vivian, I said, the position of First Lady of Ellington no longer exists. There are no more galas to host. There are no more unlimited expense accounts for wardrobe and floral arrangements. She let out a small, strangled sob. However, I said, offering a sliver of a lifeline, Horizon Commons values community. We are creating a new role, Community Events Advisor. You will report to the regional director. Your job will be to organize genuine community building activities, book clubs, networking mixers for freelancers, wellness workshops. You will have a strict budget. You will have to track every receipt. If you are willing to learn how to actually work, the job is yours. She looked at me, her face pale. You want me to plan mixers? Like a party planner? I want you to be useful, I said. It is a sensation I think you might actually enjoy once you get over the shock. I moved my gaze to Lena. She was hugging herself, looking small in her chair. Lena, I said, you have spent 10 years curating an image of perfection. You edit photos, you filter reality, you delete negative comments. That ends today. I tapped her contract. Your new title is Frontline Member Experience Manager at our downtown hub. You are not going to be in the back office. You are going to be at the front desk. You will handle member complaints face to face. When the Wi-Fi goes down, when the coffee machine breaks, when a member is having a bad day, you are going to be the one who listens and solves the problem." She shook her head rapidly. "I can't do that, Allison. I am a brand director. I don't deal with customers." "You do now," I said. "You need to learn that people are not pixels to be retouched. They are messy, and they are real. If you want a paycheck, you will learn to look them in the eye." Finally, I turned to Miles. He was not looking at the contract. He was looking at the wall, his jaw clenched tight. "And Miles," I said, "the financial wizard?" He flinched. "You like numbers," I said. "So I am putting you in charge of them. You are being transferred to the procurement and budgeting department, but you are not managing the portfolio. You are managing the inventory." I smiled, a cold, sharp expression. "You are going to negotiate the contracts for towel service. You are going to source the soap for the showers. You are going to audit the cleaning supply costs. You are going to learn that every single dollar on a spreadsheet represents a decision, a product, a person's livelihood. You are going to count pennies until you understand what a dollar is actually worth." I stepped back, standing in the center of the room, commanding the space that had once intimidated me. "Those are the terms," I said. "There is no negotiation. There is no counteroffer. And here's the most important part." I looked at all of them. "This is a package deal. If one of you refuses to sign, the deal is void. I foreclose on the entire estate. We liquidate everything. If Graham is too proud to retire, Miles loses his job. If Vivian thinks she is too good to plan book clubs, Lena ends up on the street. You rise together, or you fall together." The silence stretched out, thin and brittle. I could hear the wind rattling the window panes, a sound that emphasized the fragility of their shelter. "You can't do this," Graham whispered. "We are your family." "I am doing this because you are my family," I replied. "I am stopping you from living a lie. I am giving you the only thing you have never had, an honest day's work." Graham looked at the pen lying next to the contract. It was a heavy Mont Blanc, a symbol of the power he used to wield. He reached for it. His hand was trembling violently. The man who had signed billion-dollar mergers with a flourish could barely hold the instrument. He looked at Vivian. He looked at his children. He saw the fear in their eyes. He realized that for the first time in his life, he had to swallow his pride to save them. He uncapped the pen. He lowered the tip to the paper. I watched the ink flow, dark and permanent. Graham Ellington. The signature was shaky, a shadow of the bold autograph he used to practice. He set the pen down and pushed the paper away, looking as if he had just signed his own death warrant. Vivian was next. She cried silently as she signed, tears spotting the paper, but she signed. She was terrified of poverty more than she was attached to her pride. Lena picked up the pen with angry, jerky movements. She signed her name with a slash, glaring at me the entire time. I met her stare calmly. She would hate me for a month. She might understand me in a year. Miles was the last. He stared at the procurement clause for a long time. He was doing the math in his head, realizing that managing towel contracts was better than explaining to a bankruptcy judge why he had leveraged the family art collection. He signed. There was no dramatic music. There was no thunderclap. There was only the sound of breathing, heavy, ragged breaths from four people who had just watched their world dismantle and reassemble in a shape they did not recognize. I walked around the table and collected the contracts. I checked each signature. They were valid. "Thank you," I said. "The transition team will be here at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Be ready." I turned and walked out of the room, the contracts heavy in my hand. I did not look back. 6 weeks later. The room smelled of fresh paint and sawdust. I stood in the center of what used to be the family drawing room. The heavy velvet drapes were gone, replaced by sheer linen blinds that let the afternoon light flood in. The dark, oppressive oil paintings of stern ancestors had been taken down. The walls were painted a soft, calming sage green. The stiff, uncomfortable antique chairs were gone. In their place was a circle of comfortable, modern armchairs arranged on a plush, neutral rug. I walked over to the door. A new sign had been mounted on the wall just an hour ago. It was made of brushed steel and reclaimed wood. Horizon Commons, Community Room. This was no longer a place for judgments or tribunals. This was a space designed for connection. Tonight, we were hosting our first session, a support group for entrepreneurs dealing with burnout and anxiety. I walked to the window and looked out. The golf course was undergoing a transformation too. The back nine was being converted into a community garden and a walking trail open to the public. I saw a figure in the distance, wearing a Horizon Commons vest, directing a delivery truck. It was Miles. He was holding a clipboard. He looked busy. He looked tired, but he looked real. I turned back to the empty room. I remembered the night I stood here, reading my diary, feeling like a ghost in my own home. I remembered the night of the first intervention, where they sat in that semicircle and told me I was broken. They had staged that event to erase me. They wanted to edit me out of the family narrative because I did not fit the font. I walked to the center of the circle of empty chairs. They wanted to cut me out, I whispered to the silence, which felt peaceful now, not heavy. So I rewrote the story. I ran my hand along the back of one of the chairs. I did not destroy the family, I said. I just changed the definition. Family is not about protecting a legacy of lies. Family is about showing up, doing the work, and facing the truth. I smiled, a genuine, soft smile that reached my eyes. And sometimes, I added, family means being the one strong enough to tear the roof off so everyone else can finally see the stars. I walked to the light switch. I flipped it off. The room plunged into a soft twilight. From down the hallway, the sound of a power drill whirred to life, followed by the rhythmic banging of a hammer. It was the sound of renovation. It was the sound of something new being built on top of the old. It was the sound of my victory. I walked out of the room and closed the door on the past, ready to get to work. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope you enjoyed this journey of justice and reinvention. Please leave a comment down below and tell me, where are you listening from right now? I would love to connect with you, and if you want to hear more stories like this, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and press the hype button so we can share this story with even more people. Until next time, take care of yourselves.